What's up, YouTube, and welcome to the next episode of my console collection series. Today we're going to take a look at the Sony PlayStation Portable, or PSP. And as I like to do this series, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history with the system, as well as the hardware itself, and then we'll move into my software library and go through all the games I have in my collection to date. So really, I want to start off by saying I was a very late adopter of the PSP. I actually waited till these were on clearance and waited till the very last model was on clearance, I should say, before I bought one. So essentially the system was dead before I actually bought the system. I think I bought it in late 2013 or 2014. I don't remember exactly which it was. But essentially I bought it new in package. It was GameStop was actually blowing these out, and this was the PSP-3000 edition, which was the third variant of the hardware that came out. And bought essentially one of the very last versions of the hardware that was released. So you can take a look at the box. There's many different variations of the system box. Some of these are more of like a horizontal format fat box. This is the vertical book-shaped box, I guess you would say. That's one of the later edition ones. It really displays some of the later released games or more popular stuff that came out over the course of the library. I'm actually looking at the manufacture date on this. The system was made in June 2012, and I would assume that would be one of the last or towards the end of the hardware run that they made these. So that's a little bit about the box and history of when I bought the system. I think I paid like 70 or 80 bucks for it, was what GameStop was selling them for, even brand new in the box at that time. My system itself, you can take a look at the 3000 hardware. They did make some variations to some of the connections of buttons and things like that, but I think the biggest difference with the 3000 is actually the screen. Some people actually prefer this one, some people don't, because it has like kind of a scanline effect to it that the earlier versions did not have. I think it's just fine, but also it's the only version I know because I haven't had any of the other versions prior to this. So overall, my system has this kind of protector over it, kind of like a system condom. I don't really love it because it actually is a little bit loose as you're playing it. It slides around, but it does give it some protection just in case I was to drop it. So that's why I've left it on over the years. Probably would like to get something a little bit better. As far as the system itself goes, the D-pad I actually do like. It has a nice feel to it. It also has the analog nub, as I guess you would call it, and it's not so great. Few games require it for analog control, but it's not the best controlling thing in the world, and the Vita actually has much nicer analog sticks that they went to compared to this design. The space buttons are okay. They're a little bit thin, so like they don't really have a whole lot of travel to them, I guess would be the best way to describe it. But they do the job. And then you have these two analog, or not analog, but you have these two trigger sticks on the corners of the system as well. Obviously the system uses its proprietary UMD format to play the games, and you have the disk drive that opens up at the top that you slip the discs into. On the bottom you have your AC connector port, which is very handy to play this around the house, considering this thing sucks battery life like no tomorrow. And then you also have your AV input out, which I do want to talk about here for a moment, because that was kind of a cool feature of the PSP itself. So one of the things the system did offer is you could get a set of component cables to hook into that output and actually play it directly on a TV. So before there were things like the PlayStation TV that let you play Vita games directly as its own system outside of the handheld, you could hook your handheld up to a TV, which was pretty innovative for the time compared to, you know, it's kind of a harkening back to like the Sega Nomad for some of the AV functionality it offered outside of being a portable system. So it is kind of a nice thing that you can play your PSP games on the TV. It works just fine even today through those component cables. No, unfortunately, there's no HDMI cable. This was a little bit before its time, but you could also get just standard composite cables if you couldn't do component, but it is a nice way to hook the system up. So that's a little bit about the hardware and my history with it. Let's go ahead and talk about the game library I have. I will say many of the games on this system, unfortunately, I've never played or just haven't really put much time into, just due to the way that these games went on turbo clearance about 4 or 5 years ago, and I just started buying up anything that looked interesting without even really giving it a chance to play it. So I do have quite a backlog on the system of games that I'd like to try out, and definitely open to your own recommendations or explanations of any of the games I talk about today if there's anything that perks your interest. So let's go ahead and get started. First one of these is a game that's going to fall into that category of stuff I've never played, because this game still is shrink-wrapped, and that is Adventures to Go by Natsume. I'm a big Natsume fan of just about anything that isn't Harvest Moon or Legend of the River King, and so like to pick up their stuff whenever I can. My interpretation of just reading this box is it looks like it's a strategy RPG, but again, not something I've ever opened or put the time into. I just thought the artwork was pretty cool, and I like to get Natsume stuff. Next up is one of the cool arcade compilations, and I will say the system has a ton of great arcade compilations on it. It's one of the things that really drew me to the hardware. This is the Capcom Classics Collection Remixed, and this also has many of the games that appeared on the Capcom Classics collections for PS2 and Xbox. There's also a Capcom, very similar title, Capcom Classics Collection Reloaded, that exists. But I don't have that one because every time I'm in a game store, I can never remember if I have Remixed or Reloaded. It would have been a lot easier if they just gave it a Part 1, Part 2 title type thing like the other ones to be able to tell them apart. But this game does have all these games I kind of focus in on. You can take a look. There's some really good classics on there. Black Tiger is a really neat game that I have the arcade board of, and I think this is one of the only ways to play it on a home version outside of those other compilations I talked about. So definitely like those on the go. Another very cool piece of software for the system that is very necessary for US audiences is Castlevania the Dracula X Chronicles. If you never bought a PC Engine and had the ability to play Japanese PC Engine games, you probably missed out on Castlevania Dracula Rondo of Blood, which is one of the all-time classics for that system. I do own the original for PC Engine, but I know many people this was their first time getting a chance to play it, and it does feature that in a very nice translation for the PSP, as well as the PS1 favorite, Symphony of the Night. So easy way to get both those classic Castlevania games into a nice compilation. This one also got a re-release greatest hits type thing too, so there's also a reissue version of this you can buy. It costs a little bit less, I think. Overall, the value of this one just seems to jump all over the place. Sometimes it's expensive, sometimes it can be found pretty cheap. So if you're interested, I would definitely recommend that one for your PSP. I always like those classic Castlevania games. Next is Class of Heroes, and this kind of kicks off some of the Atlas releases in my collection. There's a ton of Atlas games for the PSP. Unfortunately, this one also falls in that category of games I've never really played, just due to timing. So, sure, someone can tell me, fill me in if this is a good game. I think there's also a Class of Heroes sequel. I can't remember if it's on PSP. It seems like it was like one of those limited release games. If I'm remembering right, that also exists on PSP. I just don't own it. Next up is yet another Atlas game. This is Crimson Gem Saga. This is another one that's really kind of been all over the map in pricing. I don't know if it got reissued or what, but I remember this was very expensive for a while, and it seems to have dropped off a little bit. It's the last time I checked it. So, yet another game, probably a JRPG. Just haven't had a chance to play it. I'm sure it's totally fine. There's got to be a reason people want that game. Just something I haven't had time to dig into deep. One of my more recent pickups is Darkstalkers Chronicle, the Chaos Tower, which is a very cool compilation of Darkstalkers characters. Really like that fighting game series, and I think it's cool that it came out on the PSP. I will say Capcom supported this system very well. It seems to be kind of where they moved to after like the Dreamcast era. They were looking for a system that they could really put a lot of their releases onto, and they definitely seemed to appreciate the PSP hardware. So I think it's cool that things like that exist. That one can be found pretty easily. I think it came out near the beginning of the system life cycle. Next one is Gladiator Begins. This is a game that I'd kind of looked past many times over the years, and then just one day I decided to pick it up because it looked like it had artwork that was very similar to the Way of the Samurai series. I think it was the same developers, Acquire, that made this game. So not necessarily something I would pick up on just from the cover art, but overall I think it does have a nice Japanese flavor to the art design. This one also, I think, got a greatest hits version, so even though I don't see it that often, it must have sold a reasonable amount of copies, and just one you can pick up pretty cheap. Next is one of my favorites. This is Gradius Collection. I think this is such a cool collection of shooters. There's so many cool compilations of arcade games on this hardware, and also just so many shooter packs that really exist. You can definitely tell that this is a shooter fan system. So this has Gradius 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Gradius Gaiden, which I think was the PS1 version that came out. So very cool compilation of those. It would cost a lot more to buy all these separately, or even get some of the packs that included these in different variations over the years. Very cool looking and sounding game. Works really well in the system, and I've played this one quite a bit. Next is yet another Atlas title. Don't know if I'm going to be able to pronounce this one. I think it's Gunir, Gnir. I don't know. You can take your best guess at that one. This one came out pretty late. It was a Sting release. I think it's a strategy RPG. Looks to be pretty good, but yet again, it falls victim to the I don't have time to play these very long games. I just decided to grab it because the artwork was pretty cool, and again, those Atlas titles are always good to pick up. Another one that I had overlooked for quite some time was Gurumin, A Monstrous Adventure, and mainly because the cover just seemed kind of cheesy. It looked almost American developed. It was published by Mastiff, which had a pretty mixed track record. Some of their stuff was good Japanese import games, some stuff was just garbage. So one thing I noticed one day just picking this case up in a store is that this is actually a Falcom title. Falcom has a pretty good track record of making a lot of good RPGs and action RPGs over the years, so I decided I should probably go ahead and check this out. This is actually an action RPG, and I'm sure it would be one that I would be more into if I would give it the time. I just need to give it, find some time to play the PSP and get into this game. If you've played that one, you could definitely let me know how it is. So next up is the first import game I'm going to talk about in this video, and one thing that is nice about the PSP is that it's completely region-free, so you can play some of these great import games that came out for the system. This is one that I picked up, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. It's called Gunhound EX, and it plays a lot like the Sega Genesis game Target Earth, so it's a mech action platformer type game. Very difficult. It's got a lot of intense shooting scenes. The one thing I will say about it is there's a ton of dialogue in the game. I'm sure if I could understand Japanese it would mean something, but these characters that you kind of see on the back are talking throughout the whole stages as you shoot away with a million things going on around you. So definitely a fun mech action game, not too serious, and it was developed by G-Rev, which was the group that was kind of like a break-off of ex-Taito developers that made a lot of the shooters in the Darius series and things like that over the years. So definitely worth taking a look. I can recommend that one, and last I checked, I don't think it goes for too much. I don't know. I haven't looked at it too much lately. Next we have one of the Hakuoki series games. These are visual novels. They are also things that I just don't have time to play. I think there was 2 that came out on the PSP. This is the only one I have. This one is Demon of the Fleeting Blossom, and I can't remember what the subtitle is at the second one. I'm sure these are decent games also, just again fall victim to more games and no time to play them. And this is Half Minute Hero by Xseed Games. I think this one was developed by Marvelous. It has a nice 8-bit appearance to it. I think that the way the game plays is a mix of old 8-bit style games, so you got all kinds of different things going on. This one probably also would be very up my alley. It's just another one I haven't made time to play. Just one of those ones that fell into the mix of get it while it's cheap and then find the time for it later. So this one I would definitely like to try out also. Hopefully get a chance to play that someday soon. Next is another Atlas title, and this is one that was definitely up my alley. This one I did make time for. This is Hammer and Hero, and this is, as far as I know, the only game in the Hammering Harry series games that we ever got in the US. There were a couple of these that made it out in European territories, and then obviously the series started by Irem in Japan, but we never got any of these in the US until now. So why they waited so long to release this, I have no idea. But it has great artwork. It is a interesting action platformer. There's kind of a construction theme going on to all the stages. It has a lot of different variety to it. There's a lot of cool Japanese style power-ups to it, like sushi and things like that you gather along the way. It really keeps the game fresh. The art style of the game is not pure 2D. It's like a 3D characters on a 2D background. So that's not really my favorite, but definitely has a cool enough style to keep me engaged. So happy we got this game here, and this one does seem to be going up quite a bit the last time I checked. Next is another Atlas title. This at one point was one of the most expensive games on the PSP, but I think it got a reprint actually near the death of the PSP lifespan, and I think it's fallen off in price quite a bit. This is Hexy's Force, I think is how you pronounce it. My understanding is yet another JRPG that I just don't have time to play. I've heard that this one is extremely long too, which is probably not the most appealing thing for somebody that's time crunched to get a chance to jump into this, but I do like the artwork, and hopefully someday I can give this one a try. Again, I guess if you've played some of these JRPGs on the system, please let me know in the comments which ones you would recommend to start with, because I have a lot of them, I just haven't had a chance to dig into them too much. Next one is another Atlas title. This is Knights in the Nightmare, and this one appealed to me because it mentions that there are, it's an RPG, but it has like shooting stages to it. So it mentions that there's some bullet hell action involved in it. This also came out on the DS, and I think I heard the DS version differs from this one quite a bit, and I can't remember what necessarily the reason why was. May just be due to like cutscenes and things like that this game has more of, just because it's on disc. I'm not sure. But you can let me know if you're more familiar with this one. Just, again, have not had a chance to dig too far deep into that one. What's interesting is I'm about to show yet another Atlas title. I put these in alphabetical order, so for some reason they all just clump together. But this is Kenka Bancho Badass Rumble. Probably one of the only games that has badass in the title, as far as I'm aware, that made it out in the US. This one is part of a larger series that had many releases actually on, I think, starting in the PS2 and then maybe even still on current hardware today. I can't remember what the Japanese title is for it. Maybe it is Kenka Bancho. It may have something else. But they are like beat-em-up, story-heavy games. I've played this one just a little bit, got into it slightly, but then something else caught my attention and I put it away. So take that as you will, but this one also seems to be drying up, and it seems like this one's been going up in price too. So hopefully give that one another try someday soon. Next up, I'm going to show you a series of games that are all by Falcom, and they were published in the US by Bandai, but overall this is a Falcom-developed series. These are Legend of Heroes games, so there are 3 of these, and then there's also like a side story game that goes with these, but I don't have that one, so hopefully I'll get that eventually. These are classic JRPG style gameplay, but again, that nice Falcom art style kind of draws you in. I've at least popped these in to test them, but I haven't really played them too much. So the first one is Legend of Heroes, A Tear of Vermilion. And then the second one in the series is Legend of Heroes 2, Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch. Some pretty elaborate titles on these. Take a look at that one. And then the third one in the series, and this one actually is pretty difficult to find. I will say this one took me a while to get. This is Legend of Heroes 3, Song of the Ocean. So again, just even plays up the connection to the Ys series that Falcom is primarily known for in the US, at least. Alright, next up is another RPG. This is Lunar Silver Star Harmony, and I can't remember if this is like a remake of Lunar Silver Star Story, or if it's considered a standalone game in the series. I have played Lunar 1 and 2 extensively, but I never had a chance to jump into this one. Just kind of reading the box, it looks like it is considered a reimagining of Silver Star Story, so maybe this is the best way to play the game, I don't know, but considering I've played it on Sega CD and then played it again on the PS1, I'm not sure if I really want to dig into it a third time, even though considering I do like that game. It's a pretty cool story and characters in it. Next up is Metal Gear Solid Digital Graphic Novel. So I am not the biggest Metal Gear fan. There's probably like 10 different Metal Gear Solid related games on the PSP. Just seems like every time I go game hunting, I see a ton of these. But this one actually did interest me because it was a digital novel, and I thought that was kind of unique to have, you know, not just a minor franchise represented by a digital novel, which you typically see, but actually a very major blockbuster game in this game format. This is one that I figured would be great to play on a plane, just kind of go along with the story, be a little low-key, but not something I've done yet, so maybe I'll do that on my next plane trip and get to dig into this one. But it seems like it would be kind of interesting to check this out in that format, and I don't think you see this one all that often, was the other reason I grabbed it. Next is a game that I own on 2 other systems already. I have the PS2 and also the Wii version of this, but this is a great compilation of all the classic Metal Slug games, and I think this has 1 through 6 on it. Yes, so you get 1 through 6 plus Metal Slug X, which is like Metal Slug 2 Enhanced. Great compilation, and cool to have these on the go. Really think that this is neat that they put all these together, because some of the Metal Slug games as standalones can go pretty expensive, so I do think that this is cool. The gameplay is actually really good with the controller on this. I know it had some issues with how they presented it on the Wii, but this one actually does just fine on the PSP, so it's a good one to take on the go. Another Metal Slug game that came out for the system is this one, and this is published by Atlas, actually, unusually, compared to the other ones. But this one is Metal Slug Double X, and I think it's considered like a reimagining of Metal Slug X, if I understand right. This one, unfortunately, I have not played because my copy is sealed. I found this sealed really cheap a few years ago, and I always said if I ever found a good deal on an open copy, I would just sell the sealed copy and keep the open one so I could play it, because I don't really collect sealed games, but at this point I feel bad opening it up, so for now I'm just going to keep it that way. If I ever do find an open copy, I'll go ahead and upgrade that and then sell this copy off. So I do love the Metal Slug series, just unfortunately I've never had a chance to play this one, and this one seems like it's really getting expensive too, so probably hurts my chances again of finding a good deal on just a loose copy that has the case and everything. Next is, I think, yet another RPG that I have not played. This is Mimana ER Chronicle, if I'm saying that right. I know little to nothing about this one, so I must have just got a deal on this and decided to grab it. I'm telling you, some of these PSP games, when GameStop was getting rid of them, you could still get them with the case and manual, and they were selling these games for like $2 to $4 a piece. It was crazy. So I remember I went on a big tear and bought a whole bunch of these, and that probably fell into that category. Next we have yet another one of the Namco Museum collections. This one I think is pretty cool. It's the Namco Museum Battle Collection. This actually lends well to the portable system, and you have some of the arranged versions of Galaga and Pac-Man, as well as some of the more obscure Namco games made it onto this collection. So you have things like Motos, which was only on a Japanese PS1 collection, I think, prior to this. So just kind of some neat stuff that you get to play on this. The other thing that's worth calling out with this and some of the other arcade compilations is the PSP lets you play it in vertical format, and you can play these arcade games in authentic format vertically, which actually does really nice for some of the shooters and things like that. So kind of a cool feature of the PSP that you can turn it on its side and play the games that way. Next up is another import game. This is Neo Geo Heroes Ultimate Shooting. So this was kind of a strange collection of SNK characters put into a shooting game, which I figured would be amazing when I first got it, and this also shows you how you can flip the game on its side, play it in vertical format, which I've done. Overall, I would say the shooting is pretty average. I do think that there was an arcade game that was related to this or based on this, but I haven't ever played that, so maybe that's better. But overall, it just seemed like fan service. They worked all these characters into the game, but the shooting itself wasn't all that fantastic, so it is what it is. Alright, next up is two of my absolute favorites for the system. These are two games I have invested very heavily into, and I would say these are musts if you're looking to build up a PSP collection. And these are actually PC Engine collections. So even though they had so many of these arcade compilations, this was a way that they collected some of the PC Engine stuff that is out there. So this one, on the surface, doesn't really look all that interesting. The first two games are Galaxy Fraulein series games, which I think are RPGs. They're very text-heavy, I know that much. But why you would want to buy this one is the third game in the pack, and that is Sapphire. A game that I think was loosely based or related to those Galaxy Fraulein series games. So this one is actually a shooter. It has always been a very expensive game on the PC Engine, and this is probably the most affordable way to play it until that new PC Engine Mini comes out, which I think features the game. And I would say that this one I've put a ton of time in just playing Sapphire for the first time ever, because I never could afford the PC Engine version. So definitely a cool way to play that game, and very nice translation as far as the PSP. As far as I can tell, I can't tell that there's anything missing from anybody that owns the arcade card version for PC Engine. So definitely can recommend this pack. And then the next one I have put way more time into. This one is probably my favorite game that came out on the PC Engine, or I'm sorry, on the PSP, is a PC Engine collection. It's another one of these. So this one has 4 of the Soldier series shooting games that came out on the PC Engine. And it's a very, at the time, was a very affordable way to get all 4 of these. I do think this game is spiked in price now. It's probably not very cheap anymore. But this one comes with Superstar Soldier, Final Soldier, which we never got in the US, Soldier Blade, which has always been a very expensive game in the US, so it was, at the time, again, a nice way to get this. And then the CD game Star Parodier, which is like a parody game of the Soldier series, which I really enjoy. So definitely can recommend this. You've even got a cameo by Master Takahashi on the back, so if you're familiar with him, from his Hudson shooting exploits. Definitely a cool thing he's included on the packaging. But these are just absolutely great shooters, and they hold up very well in the portable format, and definitely enjoy playing this game on trips. Next up is a shooter that is not good. So this is Platypus. This was a very low-budget shooting game that I just decided to get because it is a shooter. It does have kind of a weird, like, claymation art style to it that's... depending on your taste, you may like it or you may not, but the action in this game is not recommended, so I know this one never really was very expensive. I'm sure it's still pretty cheap, but unless you just have to have every shooter on the system, which I think I was going for, that would be the reason to buy that one. Another one that I probably would not recommend is Pocket Pool, and yes, I did probably just buy this because I thought the title was funny, and at the time this game was really spiking in price because I think somebody had made up a rumor that it was rare or whatever, or maybe it was just because it is a billiards game that is mature rated with all these sexual themes in it, which is kind of interesting, if not a little bit weird that they would use that to market a billiards game. So anyways, it is what it is, and it is Pocket Pool, so you can play with that on the go. Next up is a series that, again, did not really get a whole lot of US releases, but has been a Sony mainstay, I think, since the PS1, and that is Popol Croix, if I'm saying that right. It has a really cool art style to it, one that I definitely should invest some time into. Just haven't really got a chance to get too into this, but I do think that from the few minutes I've put this one in, I think it's really cool. For some reason, Sony just doesn't believe in this series, I guess, in the US, because even with this one, they didn't publish it. Age Tech brought it over to the US. So, again, I guess they just feel it's only for Japanese taste. Next up is yet another Capcom collection. This is the Power Stone collection, and it's strange that they chose the PSP to release this on, because my understanding is this is the only place outside of the Dreamcast that you could get the Power Stone series games. This one has Part 1 and then the more obscure Part 2 that you really just didn't see that often, even on Dreamcast. So very cool that this came out, and again, just shows kind of that love that Capcom had for the system. Next is a side story game from the Shin Megami Tensei series. This is the more playful Prinny games. These are actually action platformers, and since they didn't involve a huge time investment, I did play a little bit of both of these, and I thought they were pretty cool. This one is Prinny Can I Really Be the Hero? And again, just kind of has that like 3D character, but on a 2D gameplay style gameplay. So overall plays nicely. Definitely can recommend these. And then the second one, very similar to the first, is Prinny 2, Dawn of Operation Panties Dude. Yeah, they definitely have unique titles, so pretty cool stuff if you like those, or even if you don't necessarily play all those other games in the series, you can pick those up and they're good action platformers. Next is one that I thought was going to be yet another shooter. This is R-Type Command. I've always kind of had a mixed bag history with the R-Type series. Some of the games I really like, some I don't necessarily. This one, though, they took a very different tactic with it. They made it like a strategy battle game, so it's not necessarily a real heavy shooting game. It's more about planning all the strategy and stuff like that. Not necessarily up my alley or something I have the time to invest in, but it is out there and not one of the more expensive shooting-related games that you can get for the system. Next up is a game I don't know much about either. This is Race Driver 2006. I think I was just in a game store one day and I said, I don't think I've ever seen that before, so I decided to grab it. Maybe just for rarity purposes. I do like racing games, just this one's not one I've had a chance to pop in. Kind of looks like it has a mix of 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s cars all going on in the artwork there, so who knows really what the theme is or how that one plays out, but it's out there. I got one more stack to go through here. So next up is a extension of a classic Taito franchise. This is Rainbow Islands Evolution. I don't think Taito themselves had anything to do with developing this game. I think it was actually created by Marvelous. It plays okay, but just kind of has that too modern look to the graphics. They're not hand-drawn or anything like that. Never really drew me in, so I didn't play that one too long. But I do like that series. Another cool SNK compilation is the Samurai Showdown anthology. So again, SNK Playmore was big into creating these compilations too. And this one has Samurai Showdown 1 through 6. So a nice way to get all of those. This one also came out on the Wii and I think the PS2 also. I think it was just like that Metal Slug compilation. So a few different ways out there you can buy this, but if you're looking for a portable one, this does exist on the PSP. Next one is another import game. This one is Sengoku Ace Episode 3. So one of the other shooting developers that had a lot of releases on the system is Psycho, and if you look at some of their current compilations that are out there, you can get a whole bunch of Psycho games on the Switch that they've put out on a couple different packages, but this is one that I think is still exclusive to the PSP. This actually was not originally an arcade game, like the first two games in the series, so this one was a chance to release a PSP exclusive of it, and if you like the horizontal shooting style of those prior two games, I think you would like this game too. One thing I will say about it is it was developed on renderware. Alright, so next up is another of the SNK arcade collections. This one is much more familiar. This is a US release, and this is the SNK Arcade Classics 1 compilation. It has a lot of the Neo Geo hardware early releases. You get things like Burning Fight, Metal Slug, Neo Turf Masters, Sengoku, and Top Hunter in this collection. So a lot of just cool Neo Geo games that you get released in this pack. This also came out on the PS2 and Wii, so this one you can get in several different varieties, but this is a cool way to play these games at the portable, and definitely a neat pack that I'm glad came out. Next is another game I have not put any time into, unfortunately. This is Spectral Souls Resurrection of the Ethereal Empires. I'm saying that right. I don't really know much about this one. I would assume it's a strategy RPG, but again, must have just been one I bought on clearance and decided to give it a shot. Just never really dug into it. Next is an interesting little like side story game. So if you've ever played the Atlas title on the PS2, Steambot Chronicles, this is like a side story that has the same characters in it, called Steambot Chronicles Battle Tournament. And I have played this one a little bit. It has some interesting storyline to it. The mech battles are pretty fun. I do think that this is a kind of an underrated series. It was an IRM release that came out primarily in Japan, and then we got these two versions that came out for PSP and PS2. I can't remember if there's more games in that series. I want to say there is in Japan, maybe even like a PS3 or PS4 remake. So maybe in the future we'll get a few more games in the series, even though I don't really think it caught on too well in the US. Next up is a game that I would have totally overlooked because it had just such a stupid looking cover, is Street Supremacy, which also has a really stupid title. One day I finally did a little bit more digging in this game, just looking at the back of it, and I realized that this is part of the long-standing Shotoku Battle series or Tokyo Highway Battle series. So if you've ever played any of those, or Tokyo Extreme Racer, or Import Tuning Challenge, this game has a major identity crisis in the US releases. Regardless, it's a cool, Genki-developed, midnight highway battling in the Tokyo Highway system racing game, and just cool way to battle all these different gangs and things like that in it. You can build up your car. They really are fun to play, and you race in very short bursts, so if you have a short attention span, they're actually really good for that. It has just this awful marketing. Like, I would have never picked this game up had I ever just realized what it actually was. But now that I've played it, it's a welcome entry in that series, which rest in peace, because I don't think they've released any more games in it in several years. But I always really liked that series of racing games. Next up is another of the Psycho developed shooters. This is Strikers 1945 Plus. And I think this is the only way to get this one on a home console, unless maybe this one is part of those new packs on the Switch. I'm not sure. But this one has some really nice graphics in it and plays super well on the PSP. This is another one I've put quite a bit of time into. Just think that some of these shooters in the system are top-notch and didn't really get the recognition they were deserved. Next up is a pretty recent game I bought. This one also seems to be one of the more difficult to find US releases. This is Sweet Fuse at Your Side. It is a digital novel as far as I understand. Again, I have not had a chance to play it. But I know this was one of the very last releases for the PSP. It kind of has like the final version of the artwork where it has that only on PlayStation logo. I think those only came out in like 2011 on, so you can kind of tell which ones are towards the end of the PSP library. Next is yet another arcade compilation, and this one is totally up my alley. This is Taito Legends Power Up. We had the Taito Legends series games that came out for the PS2 and Xbox, and then also the Taito Memories collections that came out on Japanese PS2. So this one kind of is a weird hodgepodge mix, you can kind of see which games are included, of titles that came out on those other compilations. The one thing that makes the PSP version worth getting especially is because there are new versions of a few of the games included. So they made some exclusives just for this PSP release, modern remixed versions of some of the classic Taito arcade games. I don't really know why they only put those on this PSP version, but it's worth picking up just for that reason alone. Next is another cool Capcom release. This is Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins. Nice little remixed version of Ghosts and Goblins. Just for the portable release. Has a kind of a modern flair to the graphics that they've redone. There also is some Mega Man games they did the same thing to, but I just really didn't like how the graphics looked in them, so I always passed on them, but you can definitely get those too if you like some of those remixes of classic Capcom home and arcade games. Next is another game I don't know very much about at all. I just thought, for some reason, I guess I thought the artwork was cool. It's Undead Knights by Tecmo. Couldn't really tell you much about this one at all. Kind of looks like a Dynasty Warriors type battle game. I'm not sure if that's the case. You can tell me if you know anything more about that one. This is a kind of cool exclusive also for the PSP. This is Valkyria Chronicles 2. We got the original Valkyria Chronicles on the PS3, and then they released a sequel, strangely, only on the portable system. This one I have actually put some time into, and if you enjoyed the series, if you enjoyed the original at least, definitely recommend getting this. I think some of the newer games in the series haven't really gotten very good reviews, and I haven't played them nearly as much, so I think this one may be as far as you want to go in the series, but this one still is pretty solid. Another Atlas title. This is one I'm going to completely butcher the pronunciation of, because who knows how you're supposed to say that. I'm going to say, like, Yggdra Union? I don't know. You can tell me. We'll Never Fight Alone is the subtitle on that one. So, once again, I would assume strategy RPG based on what I'm seeing on the box, but I have not played this. This one also came out on the Game Boy Advance, which was a very late release, I think, on the Game Boy Advance, not a DS title. So, I don't know if they're exactly the same or similar games, but that also exists. Then we have this one I bought probably just solely due to the weird title. This is What Did I Do to Deserve This, My Lord 2. I think it's intended to be like a play on a very old school PC or 8-bit RPG, but once again, I have not played it. Sorry. Then we have yet another RPG. This is Wild Arms. I think it's Wild Arms F. I think it's like a stylized F. I don't know. I can't tell. It's a part of the XF. Maybe it's XF. Let's go with that. This is another member of the Wild Arms series, which got its start on the PS1, continued on the PS2, and then I can't remember if there's any more beyond that. Once again, have not had time to play it, but I have played other Wild Arms games, and I thought they were pretty cool, so I'm sure that one is just fine. Just needs more time to get into it. Another one I bought just solely on title is WTF, which in this case stands for Work Time Fun. This one had kind of an interesting history. It was a Japanese title called Baito Hell 2000, I think, and is like essentially just these very, very weird mini games. You can get an idea from the pictures on the back there. Very short mini games that were, I don't know, incredibly weird would be the best way to describe it. I'm very surprised this game came out here, and I wouldn't be surprised in the future if this one takes off in price, because I can't imagine many people bought this. But I do think it is a interesting situation of the kinds of stuff that got published on the PSP, considering how just monstrously huge the library is for the system. So next I'll talk about another long-standing series I really enjoy. Just unfortunately I have not played the PSP versions very much. We have several entries in the Ys series, and I do think that these are very cool early Falcom action RPGs. This one is a remake of Ys 1 and 2, which I'm much more familiar with from playing on the TurboGrafx and the Turbo CD, I should say. Very, very cool games, and I'm sure this remake, whatever you want to call it, is well done. Then we also have unique games in the series. So we have Ys, The Oath, and Felghana. I can't remember if this is a remake of one of the others. Let's see. Looks like it is. Okay, so it's essentially Ys 3. It's a remake of that one. So this one would follow from after the first and second compilation. Very cool artwork on those also. And then the one that is, I believe, a unique title for the PSP is Ys 7. So this may have come out on some other systems in Japan, but I think this is the only way to get this in the US, is the next game in the series that came out exclusively for the PSP. So definitely like these games, just again, haven't had a chance to dig too deep into them. And then last but not least, because I'm sure this video is getting very long, is ZHP Unlosing Ranger versus Dark Death Evil Man. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. This one is the one I bought probably due to the title, and at the time was pretty hard to find, but I don't really know a whole lot about this one. So, it does have cool artwork, I'll give it that. One of the NIS games that came out for the system. Alright, so that is it. That is my full PSP library. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Please take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day or night, wherever you are.